The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Election or not, it's fair to say that what so many people are talking about is housing. Supply, demand, and prices are in almost uncharted territory. Tonight, what the experts would like the parties to put front and center for buyers and renters. First up, Ontario, NDP leader Andrea Horwath is with us on her party's platform and on trying to win an election while she's recovering from COVID. It's Wednesday, May 25th, and that's ahead on the agenda. The saying is, third time's the charm, and that was certainly the case for Andrea Horwath in the last election. The NDP leader became leader of the official opposition for just the third time in the party's history. Now, Horwath is hoping her fourth run will result in a promotion to premier. Although briefly sidelined during this campaign by COVID-19, she's been on the virtual hustings, and that's where we find her tonight. From the provincial capital, here's Andrea Horwath, who's seeking personal re-election in the riding of Hamilton Centre. And first and foremost, let's find out how you are. COVID's no fun, so how you doing?
COVID is no fun, and thank you for asking. I'm much better. I'm testing negative.
Good to hear. Let's get to some of the issues here. You said last Friday that you would lower the price of gas right away and permanently. And I guess everybody wants to know how you can do that.
Well, we've been for some time now committing to Ontarians that we're the only ones really that are prepared to go after the big oil and gas companies. And I know that folks are being gouged at the pumps. They have been getting gouged at the pumps for a very long time. And so what we want to do is set a fair price at the pumps that deals with both the wholesale price as well as the retail price and outlaws the gouging that takes place on long weekends, for example, which is what we see all the time. So that's the plan. It's a doable plan. We know that this kind of situation exists in other jurisdictions. And we just believe it's time for people to get a break at the pumps.
Let me follow up with this, because, of course, you've heard the argument that the cheaper you make gas, the more people will drive, the more they'll drive, the more they'll pollute. That's not good for climate change. So tell us how what you want to do is consistent with a party that's got something serious to say about climate change.
You're absolutely right. And looking forward to 2030 when we cut emissions by 50% and 2050 when we're at a net zero emissions. But right now, we know that there are big parts of this province where there are no other options than to get into a car. And that's why we have to be realistic about, for example, the fact that a PSW who is needing to go from patient to patient in her rural community is going to need to put gas in the car. And when she can't afford it, she begins to wonder, whether it's worth working anymore because she's actually paying to do her job. And that's where we are now. I've heard that many times in the last little while from folks like that and others. So yes, we do have an EV strategy, and we have a transit strategy, and our Green New Democratic deal includes massive retrofits for energy conservation. But at the end of the day, we need to also make sure that people who aren't in a position at this point in time to take advantage of those things, particularly when it comes to transit and EVs, that they know we don't forget them, and we know that they're hurting.
Well, I was going to get to the Green New Democratic deal a little later, but since you brought it up, let's go for this now. You want to bring forward a plan that you say would help us inherit a livable planet. And I was following Diane Sachs, the deputy leader of the Greens, on the hustings the other day just to see what came up at the door. And one thing she said to me stuck with me. She said, if I really thought the NDP had a good, strong environmental plan, I wouldn't need to be running. So my question is your plan really ambitious enough to do enough about climate change?
I absolutely believe that it is, and I welcome Ms. Sachs to provide some information and advice. I always take that seriously. She did a great job when she was the environmental commissioner, and we will be reinstating that position because those watchdog positions are important for that very reason, to make sure that we have the plans right, to make sure we're actually following up with the plans that we've made, and that we're measuring the achievements, because you cannot reach your targets and reach your goals if you're not doing the measuring. And that's what the value of an environment commissioner, an independent watchdog is. And we've made that commitment as well to reinstate that position.
Well, she would say, for example, the Greens have got a $65 billion over 4-year plan to deal with climate change, and that all of the other parties, yourself included, kind of pale in comparison. Is that a fair knock on you, do you think?
Well, what I think is important for Ontarians to understand, and there really is only one party that's in a position to begin this work, and that is the NDP. We have a premier right now who most Ontarians, between 6 and 7 out of 10, don't want to see have a second term. And in order to ensure that that happens, the best way forward is a vote for the NDP. I don't have a problem with Mr. Schreiner, and a lot of his ideas I would tend to agree with. But at this point in time, job number one has to be making sure that Doug Ford is defeated so that we can start implementing real climate plans. And with all due respect, that's going to only happen with a government that has those goals. And the Greens are not in a position to form a government.
I'm going to circle back to some of that a little later in our conversation, because I don't want to get off the path for policy here. And let's talk long-term care, because I know you have ambitious plans to end for-profit, private long-term care, but I also know it's going to cost a lot of money. Can you tell us how that's going to work?
We do have it in our plan, Steve, both on the operational side and on the capital side. We do need to transform long-term care. It has been a disaster for a very long time. The previous Liberal government did not address the problems in long-term care. When COVID came, of course, Doug Ford had been cutting as well in long-term care, and we saw the devastation. We just saw the horrifying things that happened to 4,540, I think, is now the number of people who lost their lives to COVID in long-term care, and to things like dehydration and malnourishment. It was a horror show. We owe it to our seniors not only to fix long-term care, but to fix home care as well, get the profits out and the care back in. And yes, it's gonna cost some investment, but we just cannot turn our backs on what COVID laid bare in terms of the problems with long-term care. And that includes getting, as I said, the profits out and hiring the staff, making those jobs decent jobs, and ensuring that we have smaller homes and services, for home care in particular, as well as long-term care, smaller venues where people have a more home-like environment and where their cultures and their identities are celebrated instead of erased.
And how much do you think that would cost, and over what period of time could you get that done?
Well, we do have a transition that's in our plan, and the capital cost is significant because we know that not only do we have facilities that are completely needing to be overhauled, but we do want to make some of those facilities transform into ones that are much more community oriented. So we have about $158 billion in capital expenditures to bring the system up to par. But that's over at least one term, probably two. It's a transformative time, but we will start by not giving those for-profit homes more contracts. I mean, the Orchard Villa, one of the worst offenders, is about to be approved for a 30-year extension of taking more profits off of the backs of the seniors who are not getting the supports that they need. So we're gonna start that transformation right away.
All right, let's talk healthcare, and I'm going to ask if we can have our director bring up a graphic here which will show what you've got on offer for the healthcare changes you'd like to make, starting with bringing counseling and therapy services into the Ontario Health Insurance Plan, OHIP, reduce the wait list for children's mental health to 30 days, hire 30,000 nurses and 10,000 PSWs, hire 300 doctors in Northern Ontario, and introduce a universal pharmacare program for the province of Ontario. Now, again, we're talking big dollars here. I guess we need to know how you would intend to fund all of this.
Well, there's a couple of things, Steve. First and foremost, I think what's important is for people to know that we can fix these things. COVID has shown us what's been broken, and we have to commit to fixing this. Now is the time. We cannot simply turn away from what we've seen in the aftermath of COVID, or during COVID for that matter. We do need to have hospitals that meet people's needs. People in Ontario should be able to have the medications that they need to be well, or to get well, or to survive. The good news is that our plan does exactly that, because it makes those investments. And if you think about it this way, not only do we fix our healthcare system, but we take a heck of a lot of a financial burden off of people's backs. So, for example, if you're not having to shell out for your prescription drugs anymore, if you're able to get mental health services without having to pay for your service with your credit card, instead you can use your OHIP card, if you have access to dental care, those things take pressure off of other parts of our healthcare system, but they also take pressure off of the pocketbook. So it's a win-win plan, and it's one that, again, these are the fundamentals. These are the basics. These are the things that people have identified very clearly are priorities for them. What they need to know, though, is that there's a party that's prepared to take them on, a government that's prepared to fix those things that are broken, to go to work every day and start fixing those pieces that are most important to people. And that's exactly what our plan does. And yes, it means we have to engage with people in those fields. For example, the same things we're identifying in Northern Ontario have also been identified by the OHA, for example, and the OMA. So everybody knows that these things are broken. The good news is together we can actually fix them.
Okay, I'm going to come back at you on cost, though, and I raise the issue because I know you would raise taxes on the wealthiest Ontarians and on corporations in order to help pay for this program. Having said that, I do remember your once-upon-a-time federal counterpart, Thomas Mulcair, with whom I think you share a birthday, incidentally. I think even he got to the point where he acknowledged that if you raise taxes on rich people too much, they will consider it confiscatory. They will find all sorts of clever ways to shield their money from you, and you just can't get that much blood out of a stone. And I wonder whether you worry that the avenues you think you have to be able to pay for all these programs won't be there at the end of the day.
No, not at all, Steve. And I would say they're not stones. Those multimillionaires in Ontario are not stones. In fact, they have a lot of wealth, and many of them have seen a significant growth in their wealth over the last couple of years. And so we absolutely are going to ask them to pay a little bit more. And the same with those corporations that made windfall profits during the pandemic and should be contributing to making sure that we fix the things that are broken. There's just no doubt that can be done. So yeah, if you're earning over $220,000, we're going to ding you for a little bit of more taxes. If you're earning over $300,000, even a little bit more. These multi-millionaires that we have in Ontario can afford to pay a little more so that everyday people can afford everyday life in our province. I was on TikTok the other day because, of course, I'm sitting home with the virus, and I was just scrolling through. I don't do that very often. My sister does it all the time. I can never understand why she's sending me TikTok clips, but I started doing that, and I landed on this one woman who was maybe in her late 20s, maybe possibly early 30s, and she was sobbing to her camera and basically saying, I can't make it anymore in Ontario. I can't pay my bills. I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't afford to live here. And she was crying. And she said, certainly I'm not, am I alone? Am I the only one? Am I alone? And then it made me scroll even more. And the number of young people that were on TikTok describing how hopeless they are about how unaffordable life is in this province, it's devastating. And so we have an obligation to learn those lessons that were taught by COVID. And to take seriously the fact that we have to bring hope to the next generation.
Okay, here's where I circle back to the conversation we were having a few minutes ago, where we talk about if you don't like the current government, who is the logical alternative? And I guess the New Democrats and the Liberals both have a tougher road in a way, because they both want to be the champions of the progressive vote. So they got to deal with that first, and then once they've got that figured out, they can go take on Doug Ford. And I wonder if that makes it just that much more difficult for you to get to where you want to be at the end of the day, because the first thing you got to do is you got to convince people you're better than the Liberals, and then you got to convince people you're better than the Tories. Is that harder to do?
I don't see it that way at all, Steve. In fact, I think job number one is to make sure that we defeat Doug Ford in this election. More than 6 out of 10 people who are polled do not want to see Doug Ford become the premier again. So that's job number one. And that's the job that I'm doing. But I'm also showing folks that we don't have to go back to the same old again, and once again be disappointed by the Liberals. We saw what happened last time, and that's why Stephen Del Duca didn't even win his seat, and why they only got 7 seats and not even party status last time, because they sold off Hydro One, because the hospitals were squeezed to the point where they brought us hallway medicine, the gas plant scandal. It goes on and on. The last thing people want is to end up in the same situation that they got themselves out of in 2018. And what I'm saying to Ontarians is, you do have hope that you can have a government and a premier that works for you each and every day, that fixes the things that matter the most, and most importantly, is prepared to defeat Doug Ford and provide a province and a future where people can have some hope that the essentials are being taken care of and people can afford to build a good life here.
I take your point, but it's also, I think, fair to say that you have spent a lot of time during this campaign taking on Stephen Del Duca as well as Doug Ford. And Stephen Del Duca has spent a lot of time in this campaign, the Liberal leader, taking on you and then Doug Ford. And I don't think this is so outrageous to say the Liberal position on many issues and the New Democrat position on many issues is not that far apart. Your bigger ideological wars are with the guy who's currently the Premier of Ontario. I mean, that's fair to say, isn't it?
And that's why we're doing everything we can to show people that the best way to defeat Doug Ford is to vote for the party that has 40 seats, or that had 40 seats in the last campaign, that has an experienced bench of legislators ready to go, that has the kind of ideas and the very solutions that we need right now. Because we can fix the things, or we can take this moment in time to address the concerns that COVID has shown us that we need to address. And I'm going to just say this: those things were broken largely by the Liberals. So who can trust that they're going to be fixed by the very party that broke them? It's a very important moment in time right now. And I think people understand that there's a lot at stake in this election. And that's my message to Ontarians. And I'm going to continue to have that conversation over the next 9 days. And together, we can successfully defeat Doug Ford. And more importantly, or just as importantly, I guess I should say, we can start to fix the things that matter most to people.
Now, I appreciate your answer very much. But then again, I would look to the federal scene, and I could just as easily say, you know what? At the end of the day, your fellow caucus mate once upon a time, Jagmeet Singh, now the federal leader, and the current Liberal leader, Justin Trudeau, they've figured out how to come together and make common cause because they see a bigger enemy in the Conservatives. And I don't see any evidence of that yet between you and Del Duca and maybe even Mike Schreiner. How come?
Well, I think there's a big difference there, Steve. They've already had their election. We have to give the people of this province a chance to make a decision and to determine whether they're going to go back to a situation where it's either Liberals or Conservatives, and life just keeps getting harder, and the things that matter most keep getting broken even more, where more Conservative cuts are going to hurt people even more, where more disappointments from the Liberals are going to not make sure that things are going to ensure rather that things don't get fixed, or this time you can have a premier that's going to work for you each and every day and make sure that the things that matter most are dealt with, are addressed.
No, that's an absolutely fair point. Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Singh didn't fall in love, at least for 6 months after the election took place. So that's a good point. I get that. But tell me this, if you are looking at significant policy differences between you and the Liberals, whom you say are just as bad, if not almost as bad as the Conservatives, tell me one policy area where you and the Liberals are dramatically different on a really important policy.
Privatization, Steve. They privatized long-term care and home care. They allowed more privatization in our healthcare system. They don't believe in a respectful bargaining with with bargaining units. I mean, we remember that that's who the Liberals are. Bill 115 would not happen under an NDP government, just like Bill 124 would not happen under an NDP government. It's really disappointing for people to hear when Liberals talk a good game and then they have 15 years in office and give us things like hallway medicine, erode our healthcare system, make life harder for people, ignore the rental crisis that we have in rental housing, not getting rid of the rental regime that creates huge increases for tenants and rent evictions. They had a chance to do all those things, so they talk about them, but they don't do them.
Understood. All right, let's finish up on some discussion about what you can in fact still say with, where are we right now? I guess about a little over a week to go before Election Day. I don't know how much people are engaged. I know like 2 million people watch the leaders debate, which is a very big number. It suggests to me that people sort of starting at the beginning of the leaders debate and moving on are more engaged now with the campaign than they perhaps were in the first couple of weeks. But can you think of something that you might say in the next week that you think has an opportunity to cut through that you haven't said yet, that would give people reason to think that the poll numbers are going to move in the next week's time?
Steve, my job as a leader is to show people that they can have some hope this time. And at this point in time, that's what people need. That's what they tell me they want. They want to see some hope for the future, for their kids, hope that their 30-year-old is going to get out of the basement at some point in the next couple of years. And we all know that's not good for anybody. Having young people without hope for their future, being able to either afford their own home or even rentals these days. For me, that's what I hear on the doorstep anyways. What I hear when I go into those campaigns that my that my candidates are fighting on the ground in every riding, by the way, which is not the same as the Liberals. They haven't managed to field a candidate in every riding this time around. But it's about hope, that you can have a government that actually starts to fix the things that are problematic, starts to actually make life a little bit easier instead of a lot harder, which is what we've seen for the last 4 years, and sadly, a number of years prior to that as well.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one last question, and it's really going to tick you off, but here it comes anyway. Is it possible the numbers haven't moved very much during the course of this campaign because the biggest chunk of Ontarians is essentially content to have Doug Ford continue as Premier?
Well, I think one of the things that's clear in all of the polling is that that's not the case. That 6 or 7 out of 10 Ontarians, when polled, do not want to see Doug Ford as the Premier next time around.
But they're all split among you other parties, though. I know, but they're all split among you other parties. The reality is
why they need to come together and support the party that's got the most steam this time. As I said before, we've got a great team of candidates. They really reflect the entire breadth and depth of our province, from all kinds of occupational backgrounds, lots of legislative experience, much diversity on every level. Really proud of the team we're fielding. And if you give the NDP your vote this time, we will absolutely get to work right away on fixing the things that matter most to you.
Andrea Horwath, it's good to see you feeling better. We thank you for your time here on TVO tonight. Be well the rest of the way.
Thanks so much, Steve. Take care.
Not only has the cost of housing jumped higher, but even if you have the money, supply for people wanting to rent or buy is incredibly tight in markets across the province, and that only raises prices further. Have housing experts seen anything in the party platforms that might really work to ease the pressure? Let's find out by asking. In Pitt Meadows, British Columbia, Paul Kershaw. He is founder of the nonprofit organization Generation Squeeze and a professor at UBC. And back here in Ontario's capital city, Karen Chappell, director of the School of Cities and professor of geography and planning at the University of Toronto. Prentice Dantzler, assistant professor of sociology, also at the U of T. And Tim Hudak, CEO of OREA, the Ontario Real Estate Association, and of course, former leader of the Ontario PC Party. And as I welcome all 4 of you to the program, we have just a little housekeeping that we've got to do in the interest of full disclosure before we start. OREA is a sponsor of the agenda. We are very pleased about that, but we also point out Tim Hudak was a guest on this program well before his organization's sponsorship, And we'll have him on after the sponsorship ends as well, because, as they say, he knows the file. And with that, Tim, we're going to put you to work right away, because your organization has a new report card out called A Home for Everyone. You've assessed the 4 major parties' housing platforms. Tell us who you think you have concluded has the best platform on offer as it relates to housing, and why.
Well, first I want to say very, very proud to be sponsors of the Agenda. Steve Paikin and the Agenda, the top political show across Canada. And thank you for your focus on the depths of issues that really matter to Ontarians this campaign, like housing. So we did a report card, as you said, across the 4 parties, Liberal, Progressive, Conservative, New Democrat, and Green. And we had put on the table sort of, here's what we think is going to actually help bring home ownership closer to hardworking Ontarians. And we scored them all on how they came across on our policies. Your viewers, Steve, can see it at orea.com. I will say, as the son of 2 teachers, that if I came home with these types of grades, almost all the boxes were checked off from all 4 political parties to the credit. And if you look by and nose, the Liberals and New Democrats checked off more boxes than the other 2.
How come?
Well, the big difference really was, and I know this will be a topic you'll discuss, having watched the debate you chaired last night, on the exclusionary zoning side. So this policy we've recommended, just picture a wartime bungalow, whether it's in Toronto or Mississauga or St. Catharines, that's well past its years. And if a homeowner were to tear that down today, she could build a 4-story monster home for a family. It's happening, and that's the right. They own the property. But if you try to turn that into a duplex, a triplex, more units that people could actually afford on that property, really shut down by a grinding, expensive, NIMBY-riddled process that frustrates that those homes never built for those families. So the PCs did not check off that box, while the other 3 parties did. That was really the difference maker.
Okay, Paul, let me also get you in on this, because your organization did a comprehensive look-see at the party platforms as well, and you come to a rather different conclusion, which is, and I quote, "No party is proposing to do enough to restore housing affordability for all." Why did you come to that conclusion?
Yeah, so it's really great to hear Tim's focus and their analysis. And I think what Tim was observing, they're analyzing the degree to which home ownership is coming more in reach for people. Our analysis was looking at a broader range of issues about how are we restoring affordability more generally. And I think when you have that broader conversation going on, you're going to get a different scoring than what Tim just identified. I agree that when you're thinking about adding supply and sort of fixing the regular market, about building the right kinds of supply, you'll see that the Greens and the NDP and the Liberals are reasonably close on that front. But if you think about, hey, there's some parts of our housing system where there's like harmful demand happening. Are people buying homes and leaving them empty? Are they speculating in? Is there house flipping? Is there money laundering and whatnot? Is there blind bidding? These are examples of harmful demand where the 3 parties, the Greens, the Liberals, and NDP, they were quite focused on that. But actually the Conservatives were only addressing about half of them. And then I want to shift attention more to what the regular market doesn't do. Oftentimes, the regular market isn't actually delivering new supply that's in reach for people for what they earn, or with enough bedrooms so that kids don't have to be raised in a closet. And increasingly, are they energy efficient so that the housing contributes to our climate mitigation goals? And so more and more, we do need to think about scaling up part of the nonprofit market. The nonprofit supply of housing. And on that front, actually, the Conservatives didn't score very well there either. They don't have in their 2022 budget much of a forecast of what they want to invest there, whereas the other 3 parties were typically aligning with the recommendations of the Ontario Nonprofit Housing Association.
All right,
So,
let me pluck a quote.
Sum up, can I just to sum up, I'll give you the
sure.
high-level picture. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I thought I should do what Tim did. We had 15 action items in the policies that we were looking for. The NDP did 10, the Greens 9.5, the Liberals 8, and the Conservatives were closer to 4.
And I want to pluck another quote out of your comprehensive study, which says there is reason to remain concerned that a very large gap between housing costs and local earnings will persist for renters and aspiring owners. This is especially concerning given that Ontario has just suffered the worst erosion of housing affordability of any province at any time in the last half century. Prentice, let me get your take on that. That sounds like a fairly hopeless conclusion. Do you agree that it's that bad out there?
I think it depends on who you're asking. To Paul's point about how we're thinking about this kind of a broad range of housing options, what a lot of the plans do is really focus on housing supply, right? So we see a lot in terms of building more market rate rentals. We see different zoning patterns to kind of curb some of the housing development costs, but also to drive down housing construction. But what we really need to think about is a holistic kind of housing system, right? Are there other alternative housing strategies or options that people can take hold of? Should we be increasing community housing or social housing programs? Are there co-ops and rent control policies that we can put in place? And net alone of anything else, just increasing the housing supply doesn't drastically cut down affordability costs for all people living in the Toronto, but even across the province as well. And what it does is just kind of ends up reshuffling people from one place to another as people are trying to find more affordable housing to live, which is also disrupting even some of the smaller cities across the province as well.
Let me do a follow-up with you, Prentice, on this aspect of the story, which is to say, if you're living in Toronto or Ottawa, you are certainly well aware of how hard it is to buy a home and get into the market. But we are now seeing a phenomenon where in places like Barrie or Cambridge, Kitchener-Waterloo, Oshawa, the average price of a home there is now $1 million. I was up in Sudbury not too long ago. The housing market is extremely tight there as well. Can you tell us how all of that has an impact on even smaller town Ontario, which traditionally does not have a housing crunch, but apparently does now?
Yeah, I think part of the big issue that a lot of the plans really don't talk about specifically, right? Some of the Green Party and the New Democratic Party talk about this specifically, is just the speculation in the market, right? So a lot of the housing sales that we're seeing or home buying patterns are not from families or individuals trying to find a place to live. It's from investors, right? So when a quarter of your kind of housing is being bought by investors, that's creating a different drastic market for people to actually buy a place to live. And what's just happening is that a lot of people are kind of distancing themselves from the kind of inner core of these urban areas and moving further and further out into these smaller towns to just find an affordable place to live. So I think a lot of the housing issues that also are in conjunction with the wage issues, right? All the plans state how housing costs are rising faster than wages. So there's no holistic view on how we're going to even increase wages or incomes to even afford a housing stock that we're talking about. So you get this kind of constant reshuffling around as people are just trying to find affordable places to live across the province, which is putting pressure on some of the smaller cities that we were just talking about.
Well, there's that word again, affordable. I've heard this 1,000 times in the campaign. Affordable housing, deeply affordable housing. Karen, I want to understand from you what, in your view, constitutes, in this day and age, affordable housing.
So in housing policy, we have a definition of what is affordability. We say a household should spend about 30% of its income in order for it to be in affordable housing. Now, the issue is that we have a crisis of income inequality. We have a growing of the 1% and then immiseration of the middle class and moderate income folks and lower income folks. So the affordability crisis extends now through 80% of the population. So that narrative, however, has not caught hold with the public. So the public doesn't understand fully that the affordable housing crisis is now about them. It's about their children. It's about their grandchildren.
Well, tell me this then. If traditionally we've always considered affordable housing to be housing on which you don't have to spend more than 30% of your own income, given the reality on the ground today, do we need to reevaluate what that means? Maybe we should just be expecting to pay half of our income on housing these days because that's where it's at. What do you think?
I don't think the math works out, Steve. If you look at household budgets and you look at rising food costs, rising transportation costs, there's just no room to pay more for housing.
Tim, do you agree with that?
No, you listen to this debate's a bit like how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, right? In terms of one thing I've learned in all the time in public life, Steve, that people are people. They'll make choices. Some will spend more than that. Some will spend less. The number I focus on is the rate of home ownership in our province. And a great story about Canada has been that from Confederation through the wars, the 1970s, you had a better shot at owning a home than your parents or grandparents. And that built our middle class. It's the strength of our social fabric until the last 6 years. Well, 2016, they headed downhill. We put a focus on getting that number back up, getting back up to about 70% of adults in Ontario should be homeowners. And that benefits renters as well, because when you move into a home that you own, frees up more quality rental, and it goes all through the spectrum through social housing as well. That's my target.
Okay, Paul, would you agree with that approach?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in on that front. So I think Tim's really bang on in observing that homeownership has been changing, and we do need to see that there's an age polarization here. So homeownership continues to rise for an older demographic in Ontario, but by comparison with when baby boomers started out in Ontario as young adults, homeownership is now down 20% for those under age 45. And that's a really big challenge because, as Tim showed, as homeownership declines for a younger demographic, there's more competition for rentals that drives rent up, and then it's harder to save for homeownership into the future. And then I think Karen was making a really important point about the degree to which sort of there's like a hollowing out of our middle class. But I would want to put one refinement on what Karen said, because there is a hollowing out in two ways. One quite positive. For an older demographic, the amount of wealth people have been able to acquire from having slept in their home, cooked in their home, raised their kids in their home over the last decades, pushing many older Ontarians into something above the middle class. You only need $1 million to really be the global 1%. Ontario's housing system is producing a lot of global 1%ers, and it's their kids and grandchildren who are then being pushed out of the middle class because they are struggling to be able to find secure housing with enough bedrooms, whether as a renter in a co-op and maybe homeownership. I mean, homeownership is being pushed out of reach for young people who earn six figures as lawyers, let alone the middle class in terms of the earnings.
Well, okay, Prentice, let me follow up with this. There's a great deal of political attention often paid to the middle class because, quite frankly, they vote. And perhaps that attention comes at the expense of lower income people who don't vote as much. In which case, is it possible to create housing policy that actually focuses on the deeply underhoused, lower income part of our population? What do you think?
Yeah, to some of the points that have been raised in the plans themselves, right? The plans that actually deal with dividing or kind of contributing or constructing new social housing or new community housing directly goes to lower income groups or lower income households. And in order to get that piece, you really need to think about some of these other costs that are for affordable housing developers. Now, the Doug Ford's kind of housing affordability task force report dealt with some of this, but it doesn't nearly go to the degree in terms of really thinking about what an affordable housing sector would look like that could cater specifically to lower income or moderate income households.
We're going to come back to that affordability housing task force report in a few moments, but I first want to share the results of some polling done by Scotiabank. And Sheldon, if you would, let's bring this graphic up here. Scotiabank found that twice as many Canadians are pausing their plans to buy a home due to today's economic environment compared to the first year of the pandemic in 2020. And 90% of Canadians aged 18 to 34 believe that housing prices will continue to surge over the next 12 months. And because of that, over 6 in 10, 62% of millennials say they have decided to wait for prices to go down before purchasing a home. Okay, Karen, can you help us understand the significance of those findings?
Yeah, I think we're in a climate now that the younger generation, just as Paul was saying, is basically discouraged from entering the housing market, and rightly so, because our housing institutions, our zoning and so forth, were invented in the post-World War II era and have kind of been baked into our how we do housing in this country. And without a real major rethink of how we do housing finance, of how we address income inequality, we're not going to be able to move forward.
Well, here's where I asked him to put his former hat as a politician on, because, and I don't say this with any joy at all, but the dirty little secret of politics is that young people simply don't vote. And in particular, they don't vote Conservative. So should we be surprised that perhaps the Progressive Conservative Party in this election campaign has had the least amount of all the major parties to say when it comes to trying to get young people into that first home?
So they've got a good track record of time in office, right? And if they were on the debate last night, if I would have been the candidate, I would have talked about a record number of homes that were built in 2021. I think that was the most homes in 30 years.
They didn't show up, though, Tim. They didn't give us a candidate, so what are you going to do?
Chance to show off talent. The three candidates had on last night, right? All up and comers, all impressive. I hope they're successful in their careers in politics. But they did bring forward two pieces of legislation that are very pro home ownership. You did see more homes being built, more quality rentals too. that came into the marketplace. We built more homes in the 1970s than we did in the 2000s, and no wonder we're in the mess we're in. So there has been a lot on the track record. The 1.5 million homes that came out of the Housing Affordability Task Force over the next 10 years will be absolutely essential as a target because it meets rising demand from millennials and new Canadians, but it also plays catch up for that huge gap in the past that did find resonance in the PC's platform, as well as the Liberals and New Democrats that I heard in your show last night. The Greens embrace it as well. Because if you're not setting a target, you're not measuring, you're just practicing. So I want to see that goal attained.
All right, I take your point, but Paul, I've got to follow up with you on this because your organization, represents a group of young people who, frankly, don't vote. Or they certainly don't vote in numbers proportionate to their percentage of the population. How do they expect to have housing policy come their way if they don't get out and reward the parties that create that policy?
Yeah, so you're right. So at Gen Squeeze, we're in the business of speaking hard truths. And one of the hard truths we need to tell to a younger demographic is that, as Tim was saying, politics responds to those who organize and show up, especially showing up at a ballot box during an election campaign. And so long as a younger demographic have been socialized themselves to think that politics is better to make a punchline on some joke rather than a process to really respect and make work for us, we are not going to get the housing policy that's going to work for all generations. So that's the hard truth to younger folks. Please get out there. I don't care who you vote for, but our ability to influence policy going forward will grow with your turning up. But the other hard truth has to come back to an older part of the parties more generally. Not a single party is committing to a target, I think a really important target, that we want home prices to stall so that earnings have a chance to catch up. Tim's talking about the record of the current government going into this election, that they built more units in the last while than in the last 30 years. Okay. If that's true, though, then if that's the key, we would hope that would have had a dampening influence to some degree on what's happening in the housing market in terms of affordability. But we haven't. We've seen the worst erosion of housing affordability over the last couple of years in Ontario that we have witnessed in any province at any time in the last half century. Now, that's the track record that really is at issue right now in this election. And I'm surprised that that track record isn't getting more critique. And I don't say that in a partisan way. I would make that critique in some regards of the NDP government in BC and the Liberal government federally. So I'm happy to now put it at the Conservative government provincially. Let's say that's not good enough. We don't want that from our housing system. The goal should be for home prices to stall so that earnings can catch up. That's how we start to restore affordability. I
do want to hear, though, from Prentice and from Karen, because you spend your lives, professionally speaking, dealing with young people. And I wonder, Prentice, as you talk to them about political engagement, do they understand that they're not going to see policy that will meet their needs unless they get more politically engaged?
Yeah, I think we need to kind of decouple when we talk about political engagement, what that really means, right? And I think a lot of this conversation has been focused on voting, where a lot of young people are politically engaged in different ways, right? They're volunteering in different organizations. They're protesting when things come up in a result. Yes, this doesn't lead to the kind of election of political figures, but it's also a long-term game for a lot of people. So when we're thinking about how kind of younger people are actually engaged in the political office or the political system, they're involved. They're just involved in different ways. They don't just kind of do the same traditional ways of just voting or participating in an election, even though that's traditionally how you kind of elect leaders to make decisions and make policies. So when we kind of think about how do we incorporate them into the broader political system, we need to think about alternative ways to kind of include and think about community resilience, community participation, civic engagement that kind of encompasses all these different forms of political engagement outside just the things of just voting for a particular thing. There's a lot of people that are involved in kind of stopping or stalling kind of housing development, and that's outside the bounds of just voting. They're going to fight for public forums, or they're going to debate a housing construction plan at the local zoning board. So there's different ways to be politically involved.
No, I get it. And Karen, I've seen lots of great political engagement by young people at post-secondary of post-secondary age, but it doesn't seem to extend to either joining or getting involved with a political party and actually voting or campaigning or trying to influence policy. What do you see in your daily life with students that somehow prevents them from taking that last step, which might actually get some policy that they would enjoy?
Well, housing policy is extraordinarily complex. And when you see how students organize, and this is true of interest groups generally, they tend to organize around a particular position or issue. And so you'll have folks that are choosing either housing supply or rent control and tenant protections. And yet this is a both and kind of solution that we need to find. It's not an either or solution. And so until you see that the way we're going to address this problem is by both building housing supply and having tenant protections in place and the types of measures that Paul is talking about in terms of taxation, you need all of these, just like you need to do solar and wind and everything in order to address climate change.
All right, I'm going to get off my. Yeah,
a
please.
Note of optimism on this. We've actually polled on this at the Ontario Real Estate Association, and we did find that millennials and Generation Z right beneath them are heavily motivated on this. And I have never seen in my time in public life, and I suspect you as well, where housing is a top probably 2 issue as it was nationally. So we actually do see that people who want to get in the market, maybe it's not, first-time voters 18 to 22 or so, but above that are motivated by this issue. And we also see the second group, quite frankly, are the parents who love their sons and daughters dearly, proud of them, but wouldn't mind getting out of the basement or the attic and getting a place to run.
Amen to that. All right. Well, while you've got the floor, Tim, let me follow up on something Prentice mentioned a moment ago, which was this Ontario Affordable Housing Task Force made a lot of recommendations to the provincial government. I think you're a member of that task force, so maybe you could come in here and tell us what, in your view, were some of the key suggestions and whether they've been moved on.
It was gutsy, it was clear, and really pleased to see a lot of the suggestions did pop up in the major party platforms. The number one goal, just creating more homes across the spectrum, particularly first-time buyers, move-up homes when the kids grow up and you want a bit more space, and quality rentals. Those are the top 3. How do you get there? We actually laid out the most gutsy choices. A lot of it, quite frankly, is standing up to NIMBYism, trying to get the politics out of the approval process to try to combat snob zoning where you don't want rentals or other housing in your neighborhood. We had to stand up against that, particularly in our urban areas and where we built up our transit systems, and rightly so. Another major recommendation I'd highlight is you also have some carrots. So if a municipality, Steve, is playing ball, they're welcoming new neighbors, they want to see their young talent to thrive and afford a home or a good rental in their community, reward them. So when they've got that infrastructure project for water or sewer or rail or a new rec center, they go to the top of the list. But a municipality caters to NIMBYism, they don't want new neighbors, put them to the bottom. Let's actually reward good behavior and have sticks against bad.
Paul, how much courage have you seen at any level of government to embrace these recommendations?
Well, I think on the task force issue that there was real bravery and sort of the tension between NIMBYism and getting stuff built. And so kudos to the task force on focusing on that theme and urging more bravery. It was interesting to then see, my sense is that actually the Premier didn't pick up as much of that bravery as I anticipated. And in fact, it's had even, I think, some more influence potentially out here in British Columbia than it did in Ontario so far. But more generally, we don't have enough bravery. Let's be honest, we don't have any party telling Canadians, telling Ontarians, what do we want from housing? Do we want it to be this investment strategy that allows us to gain wealth windows, or do we want to have housing be a place to call home, in which case we want home prices to stall? And if we don't have that clarity of purpose, we're not going to organize all of our policies accordingly. And we don't have that clarity of purpose just yet because no one's really tackling that we have a cultural addiction in Ontario and across this country to high and rising home prices. In the world of politics we do, and many everyday homeowners do, because we've been entangled in the incentive that we should count on high and rising home prices for our savings down the road. And if that's what we're counting on, we are baking in unaffordability year over year. And so I'm pleading, I'll get on my knees with all 4 party leaders. I'll kiss their feet if we can have one or more of them say, we want home prices to stall, vote for me for that very reason. Because if you don't hear a party saying that, then we do need to be looking elsewhere to cast our vote.
Tim, could any politician say that and get reelected?
Doubt it. Look, I think what you need to do here is very focused. Like an overall policy to try to bring people's investments down is not advisable. It's not going to find traction in any party as we've seen.
Stall is safe.
Investments, right? You need to focus on the entry-level home and getting good quality rentals, both in purpose-built rental. And another recommendation that we put on the table at AREA that was echoed in the task force report was allow homeowners to have secondary suites in their homes, right? The granny suite or above the attic. That will democratize rentals in every part of the province and move up homes. So you focus on those areas, you help bring the keys closer to hand. That's a practical way of doing this, as opposed to an overall policy to bring housing prices down in general.
Karen, while it might be advisable to try to find politicians who will say we're going to stall the increase in what your house is worth so we can get people who are out in, can you really imagine politicians actually doing that?
No, I can't. I think, though, what they can do, and I do want to credit the Affordability Task Force for bringing this up, what they can do is shape the narrative on exclusionary zoning. And they can move forward with educating the public about what NIMBYism is doing. And then we need to implement. And that's the big question then, is how do we get rid of exclusionary zoning in practice? Changing the zoning doesn't unleash a big wave of building. That's just wishful thinking. We need to change other regulations, design and building codes. We need to solve the labor shortage issue. We need to address construction costs, and we need capacity. We need to educate homeowners about garden suites. How do you build? We need to have events. We need to have fairs. We need to have courses. We need to build the industry. We need to make sure that there's a garden suite industry ready to go. We need to figure out how to make manufactured housing cheaper. We need buy-in. We need homeowners to realize that it's about their families too. And then we need to have incentives for cities. And Tim mentioned the sticks, but I'd like to see the incentives. I'd like to see financing, permitting divisions that do really well and get a lot of units through. And I'd like to see a relentless focus on affordability throughout all of this, because you can end exclusionary zoning and then just have a lot of developers profit by building condos.
Can I just share one stat with you, Steve?
All right, Paul, yes, the floor is yours.
Thinking about whether or not it's politically doable for politicians to propose stalling home prices, well, to the degree that politics responds to the public opinion, we polled in Ontario, and 2/3 of Ontarians support the idea that we should stall home prices so that earnings have a chance to catch up. That's a lot of political cover to work with. And so I do think there's more room for politicians to be brave on this point.
Okay, Prentice, I'd like your view on how well the recommendations you think, how effective they were from this Affordability Task Force. What's your take?
When reading the task force plan, it just reads like a classic kind of approach to addressing housing affordability issues through market supply, right? So in a lot of ways, I applaud them for thinking about the zoning issues, thinking about the processes in which you're kind of thinking about how housing developers are actually going through the process of constructing new housing. But again, when you're thinking about driving prices down in the short term, there's really nothing in that plan that I see really addressing that. It's also a lot of this kind of conversation has been focused on home ownership as like that metric that we could look at. But what we should also be looking at is residential stability. How long are we keeping people in different neighborhoods across the GTA so they can take rewards or kind of have access to some of these resources and amenities that we talk about the province having, or even cities in different urbanizing areas having. So when we think about this kind of plan, it kind of lacks the other kind of demand side interventions that we would like to see, whether it's rent control, whether it's creating more stock of social housing and community housing programs, whether it's addressing issues of eviction when landlords can just evict to raise rents. So a lot of the other interventions that we would like to see in a plan, and a typical housing plan that's more inclusive, are not just there.
Paul, I well remember it was probably a month or two before the election campaign began that Ontario's Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing went before the microphones and the media and said, look, these are good recommendations and I'd love to do them, but there's no support at the municipal level to make this stuff happen. It's just not there. What do we do about that?
Well, I think one tool that both the province and the federal government are imagining using, and planning to use, I should say, is how they can offer some of the carrots, the incentives to cities to be able to resist some of the NIMBYism, saying, if we want the biggest share of federal or provincial transit dollars or housing dollars, we need to have the plans that add the density. So let me serve you as mayor or council citizens to get a better share of these senior level government's investments by building in the density and planning for that. I think that kind of cover matters at the municipal level, and that was one of the strengths of the Housing Affordability Task Force report.
All right, Tim, I'll give the last word to you on this. We're down to our last minute here, and that is everybody's looking for bravery. Everybody's looking for reasons to be hopeful. We don't necessarily see very much of either. What can you tell us that should make us more inclined to think both are around the corner?
Well, good start, right? We're making more homes than we have in 30 years. Number two, each of the platforms does have detailed steps forward. Is it everything? No, but there's a hell of a lot here, more than I have seen in any other campaign focused on affordability, on home ownership, and good quality rentals. So I'm encouraged about that. There's a practical nature to this as well. Premier Ford having been a city councillor in Toronto before, Steve Clark having been the head of AMO and a mayor himself. They know the municipalities, it's the proverbially, can bring a municipal horse to water, can he make it drink? So they give some time to encourage it before moving on some of these policies. My last comment, Steve, I think all parties still had a whiff. There was nothing really in here about helping first-time home buyers get in the market. That would really tapped into a lot of voter potential. We've called for an elimination of the land transfer tax for first-time buyers, or at least doubling the current rebate. I would love to have seen that. I think that would have resonated and helped level the playing field for first-time buyers.
My thanks to all four of you. That was a very smart and engaging discussion. Karen Chappell, Paul Kershaw, Prentice Dantzler, Tim Hudak. Great of all of you to join us on TVO tonight. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great evening.
And that is the agenda for Wednesday, May 25th, 2022. Tomorrow, every party has a lot to say about transit and transportation infrastructure. We'll debrief those promises. Also, we'll find out if cities can expect much from whomever forms the next government. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.